Hi, my name is Tony Sturts. I'm a certified academic language therapist, and I've made this resource to help beginning and struggling readers. I will take you through each part of the resource. This is the very first unit, but every unit basically builds on the last unit and follows the same structure. So you don't have to do every single lesson. They're there if your student needs more practice. But I always say that students should go as quickly as they can, but as slowly as they need to. So if you do one or two lessons, your student is doing fairly well, then go on to the next unit and continue to build on the foundation that you've already started with. This is a very simple lesson because it's starting, the one that I'm demonstrating is starting with the vowel A. But as you go through and build more and more.
Next part of our lesson is going to be concentrating on phonemic awareness. It's one of the most important parts of our lesson because we know that students that are beginning readers and also ones that struggle, the main thing that people struggle with is the phoneme grapheme correspondence, the letter sound correspondence. So we're going to use some multisensory activities to connect those sounds and letters. So let's go ahead and look at this phonemic awareness activity sheet. They all the different units have them. They get more complex as the reading gets more complex, but you basically follow the same patterns. So here we're just having the student say that beginning sound ah in all these words. And here we're going to have them listening for that ah sound. So some of the words have ah and some of them don't as a beginning sound. So if they hear an ah, like an at, they're going to write the A. If they hear an A, ah, they're going to write A and say ah. If they don't hear it, they're going to write a line, like in the word pan. So we're not going to show the student this sheet. This is just for you to read. So that's the first part. And then the next part, they're listening for the ah sound in the middle. So if they hear an ah in the middle of the word, then they're going to write an A and say ah. If they don't hear an A, like in the word tin, they're not going to write an A. They're not going to write anything. They're just going to write a line. So if the student can't hear it, if you say tin and they write an A, then you have to elongate it for them. Tin. Listen for the, do you hear the ah sound in tin? In. And so make that for them. If they can't hear it, help them. If you're doing this in a large group, well, not a large group, but a small group of maybe 3 to 5 kids, you can stop or you can go through the whole thing and then go back and have them check how they did. And if students are struggling, then you can pull out and do a little bit of remediation there. So it depends on if you're working with one-on-one or with a group of students. But sometimes it takes children a while, but give them that opportunity. Every time they hear the ah in the middle, they're going to write the A and say ah. And then here, we're going to be working on word families. Why word families? Well, because we're not having them memorize a word family. Like, we're not saying this is at. What we're having them do is being able to focus on the vowel. So I would say, I'm going to say some words, and you're going to tell me the word families in those words, and then we're going to write them. So let's do this first one to show you an example. I would say fat. The student would also say fat. What's the word family in fat? Now, if your student can't do it, then have them break it up. And I have them sometimes do head and shoulders, or you can do it this way, at. And they do it, at. What do you hear as the word family? At. Let's say at. At. We're going to write at. We're going to say the sounds as we write it. At. What's the word family? At. Let's do the next one. The next one's man. What do you hear as the word family in man? and, an. And that N makes a little bit of a nasal sound, so it changes the vowel just a bit, but to have them an. Okay? The next word is tan. What's the word family in tan? And again, if they can't do it, then have them an. What is it? An. An. Let's write it. An. Read it. An. The next word is tap. What's the word family? Up. Let's write it. Up. What if your student doesn't know how to write it? Okay, well, we can use letter tiles. So, for example, if we say up and the student doesn't know how to do it, or they don't write the correct letter, you can do it with letter tiles as well. You can do that first, and then you can go back and do it with writing later. So if I say, what's the word family in tap? It's app. Can you find and give them a selection of letters, not too many, but a selection of letters so it's a multiple choice. App. Okay, if they don't pick the right one, for example, when they pick, have them say the letter sounds. So ah, and if they pick this one and say p, you'd say, you picked b. This is ab. Let's pick up and give them another chance to pick the right one. Usually, if it's between two like that, then they will pick the right one. Have them say the letter name as they bring it down. P. Up. Say it. Up. So, go ahead and do it with letter tiles, but then I always recommend to work on having them write it as well. So, up. Okay. If your student is doing really well with this and they are not struggling, then you can also have them go ahead and do it as, go ahead and have them work on the whole word. So you could do, let's do the word fat. Let's do fat. Ready? Fat. So we're going to write it. Say the letter sound as they write it. Fat. Okay, so it depends on the level of your student. Many of my students are struggling, so I really want to focus on that vowel. And as we go on, we're going to be contrasting vowels, so it won't just be A, it'll be A and I, and A and O, and so having them make that contrast, this is the very first lesson, so we're not going to have them differentiating right from the very beginning, but very soon after we start with that differentiation between vowels. So go ahead and have your student work on this multisensory phonemic awareness. Studies have shown that phonemic awareness and working with phonemic awareness is much more powerful for students if we add in the letters as we're doing it. And writing is a multisensory activity. When you are doing writing, students are hearing it, they're saying it, they're feeling it because they're writing it, and that is so helpful for students. So even students who are struggling, if you can have them write, that's really good. But it's important that they form those letters correctly because we don't want the wrong messages being sent to the brain. So if your student is struggling with writing, make sure you add that into their day, that they're forming things correctly, especially if students struggle with B and D and other letters that are visually similar. Having them write them and write them correctly is really important. For example, I've seen many students write a B like this. That's not real helpful. If you just go down, back up, and around. B says B. For D, I've had kids do I can't even do it, like a fish symbol, like that, or something really wonky. I do push around, up and down, D says D. So that when we are making a B, it is very distinct from making a D. And the same thing with a P. We talk about go down, back up, and around. P says P. Make sure when you're doing these activities that you are not having the student saying P, P, and N. It has to be a really clear, crisp ending so that students are not adding that extra on the end, because that really messes students up when they do something like the word pan. If they're doing p, it's pan. It makes it really hard to blend back together again. Pan. Okay, so we want to make it clear and crisp. If you have to add just a tiny bit of something, it would be better to do So p. I try not to do anything, but if you have to, that just a little bit, but you don't want that on there. So go ahead and work on that auditory memory and discrimination. Make sure you add that into your lesson and don't skip it, because it's one of the most important parts of your lesson. Next part of our lesson is quite quick. We're going to be doing letter fluency, so you can be working on letter names or letter sounds. Letter sounds are more important than letter names, and I usually work on letter sounds. So we would just go through and say the sounds. B, A, G, H, J, O, R. And make sure we're not doing B, G, H. It's just that clear, crisp sound. You can also play games with this. If your student is really struggling, I wouldn't spend a lot of time on this normally, but if your student is struggling, you can go back later and then have them put like a marker on the sound, that your target sound that they're having trouble with. Find that all the sounds are gonna be green, and then you could say, okay, put a red token on the D, and find the D and put a red token on the D. So you can use these in creative ways, but normally I just go through quickly and have the students point and say the sounds. And then after you do that, you're going to be working on word families. I want to be clear about word families. I am not saying that we should have students memorize word families in the sense of memorizing them as a unit. What we want students to do is know that this is an, at, the two sounds, and be able to quickly sound that and map that in their mind and know that's am and at. But I'm not asking your students to memorize that. If they need to sound, they can and they should. And make sure that they're elongating those sounds and blending them together so it's not it's an, at, up. So we are blending those sounds together and reading them, and hopefully it will become quick for them. And, up. But we're not asking them to memorize word families. Please don't do that. Make sure that they're doing that letter sound correspondence. And if they're struggling with the B's and the D's, again, you can have them write it. Push around, up and down. D says D. Start at the top, go down, back up and around. B says B. Go down, back up and around. P says P. So I would have them write it and say it, and that really is a helpful way to get children to differentiate by feeling the difference by the way we write it. So that's word family fluency. It should not take very long. If your student is struggling and needs a longer time, then just do half the sheet. Don't do the whole thing. The same goes for letter fluency. You don't want to spend your whole time on that, so if you need to, you can cut it in half and do some one day and some another day. That is the next part of our lesson. The next part of our lesson, we're going to be working on words and phrases with your student. So if your student is still struggling with blending, let's talk about blending. So there's two ways to do that. It's very popular right now. People talk about continuous blending, and I've been doing this since I started teaching reading over 20 years ago. So I didn't know that there was a name for it, but it's called continuous blending. So one way to do it is to have your students start, and what we're going to do is elongate the sounds. So instead of s, we're going to do s, sound. Okay, so you're going to have them elongate those sounds and hold on to them before. Okay, that's one way to do it, and it's a perfectly good way to do it. Another way to do it is that I learned in my certified academic language therapy training, and that's what this is based upon, is the word family that we've been talking about and working with. I asked the student, what's the word family? What's the beginning sound? What's the word? So that gives them two chunks to work with. Again, we're not saying that this is to be memorized. We're still we're still breaking it apart. They know this is and this is sam. So it's two different ways to do it. They're both basically taking the student and giving them being able to chunk that together and be able to blend it together instead of three separate sounds. Okay, so that's what we're working on with that blending. So we're going to go through, we're going to read those. Hopefully the student will be able to read them quickly, but that happens with time. So they're going to read the words as they go along. Now this part, sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. This is nonsense words. I don't always do this because sometimes I just need this here because people often want to do an assessment. Can my student, especially with older students, they often will have memorized a lot of words. So it's often helpful to do a nonsense word just to see, can they actually figure out by knowing the sound and symbol correspondence and not just by a memorized word. So that's why that's there. You can use it or you can skip it depending on the needs of your student. And then we have the high frequency words there, and there are some sheets that come along with this pack that you can go through, and the students can work on those high frequency words more than just memorizing them, but actually mapping them as well. And then we're going to go through and do just a phrase: had ham, a man, a cat. So I have the student go ahead and decode it and sound it out if they need to, and after they do it, then we scoop it and we say, okay, they sounded it out, they know what it is. So had ham, a man, a cat. Now when you first start, your student will have to probably sound out a lot. As they go on, they will get better at being able to do it more quickly. But some students get so used to sounding everything out that even after they've been able to do it for a while, and they should be able to do it without sounding every single thing, then what I have them do is I let them decode it and sound it out if they need to, but then I say, okay, now I want you to keep your mouth closed until you know what you want, read this in your mind, and then say it out loud. Is mad. The ham. So it gets them to the point where they realize, oh, I don't have to sound everything out because my brain knows what that is and I can read it, and they can say that in their mind and then read more quickly. That will not happen right away for a lot of students that struggle. You may have to do quite a few lessons before they're ready to do that. But if you've got a student that you're pretty sure that they've got those sounds down, that's one strategy to use, to have them keep their mouth closed until they know what that word or what that phrase is. But don't do that unless you're pretty sure that they already know those sounds and have mapped them often and well with fluency, doing these auditory memory and discrimination sheets, and also word chaining, and being able to do that. And once they're able to do that, then you should see that progress with that fluency. And that last activity, that may be the only thing that you get through that day. You may not even get through all that much, depending on the needs of your student. The next activity you can do on another day or on the same lesson, depending on the needs of your student, is to read decodable text. We want to start this very soon after learning to put those letters and sounds together so that students can be motivated that they can actually read a story. So I put the point and say sounds and word families here because oftentimes I can't get through to this until another day. So I want to review those sounds again. So quickly, s, f, t, d, k. And if they can read it quickly, great. And, add, at. If they can't, an, add, at. However they have to do it, but make sure that we are blending the sounds and then saying them quickly. And then they go through and they're going to highlight the words in the story that they see. So we go through and we find is. So we find is, and I'm going to make is and is and is. And I'm going to say that as I underline it. And the next thing I'm going to look for is this word and have the student sound it. Ham. Find it in the story. Underline it. Ham. And then we find the next one and we do it. So we're going to go through, we're going to highlight our words, and then we're going to read the story. Sam's cat. And we're going to read Sam is a man, and if they have to sound everything, that's totally fine, but make sure when you're sounding, you are Sam. Now, what if they can't read that word? They're reading it incorrectly. We stop and we say, okay, this is how I do it with my students. I say, what's the word family? The word family is am. What's the beginning sound? S. The word is Sam. Then I have the student, you're going to write that with me. We're going to write Sam 3 times. We're going to say Sam. 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 So what we're doing is we are pairing what we're writing with what we're saying the letter sound as we write the letter. Then we go back and say it. I often will have students do it with their finger first, with it on a textured surface. The word is Sam. 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 So we're trying to get that multi-sensory, pairing the letter sound with the letter symbol in the brain mapped together. So if a student is struggling, we stop and we say, what's the word family? what's the beginning sound, what's the word, and then we stop and we write it 3 times. Then once the student has read the story, or if your student is really slow and you just want to take part of the story, that's totally fine. You work at the pace of your student. Go as quickly as they can, but as slow as they need to. So then we're going to, after we read the story, then we're going to do our dictation. We can take and just do dictation of a couple of letters, or we can do a word family, or we can do a word. So if we wanted just to do a word family, we could do at, a dot for each letter. Then we're going to say the letter sound, at. The word is at. Let's do the word had. Ad. Let's write it. Ad. Very important, say the letter sound as you write the letter had. So we're going to do dictation, and then after we've done dictation with that, then we can take a phrase or a sentence. So you might want to just do a man, or Sam had a cat, or cat is fat. Depending on the need and the time that you have, do a phrase or a sentence. I often will have the student write a line for each part of the phrase or sentence. So if I was going to do Sam is a man, how many words are we going to write? Then if they need to, they can also dot it. Sam, Sam. Let's write it. The next word is. Now, this is one of our high frequency words or tricky words. So, is. This S is saying an unusual sound. It's saying a Z sound. So, is. Okay? And oftentimes, what I will do is I will cover up this part as we do it, because I don't want copying. I want that letter sound correspondence and making those connections for your students. Students who struggle, especially ones that have dyslexic tendencies, they can copy till the cows come home, and it doesn't really help that much. Their brains don't remember that way. So you need to do that sound symbol correspondence with them as they're writing. So I cover it while we're doing this activity. So that is the next part, and you may only get through that part on that day. That's a lot to cover for many students. If you can go on. If you don't get through the whole thing, just do whatever you can and go back the next day. But make sure that you're going ahead and doing, if you haven't finished your phonemic awareness, the auditory memory and discrimination, go back and do some of that each day as well. This is extremely important. So you may not get through all the activities. That's okay. But make sure you do this for at least 5 minutes before you go on to the next part of the lesson. The next day, or the next part of the lesson, you'll be working on rereading. And rereading is great, but I like to do it in this way because it gets that writing in there, and it also it's fun for the kids and gives you some idea whether they're comprehending what they're reading or not. So this is called a Cloze passage, and what I have the students do is they're going to read the word bank at the bottom of the page. So is, man, fat, had. Now, what I have them do is I have them go back and read and find what word goes in there. Sam is a what? Well, Sam is a man in this story. So we're going to write man. But again, I want to discourage copying. So I'm going to cover that up, and I'm going to say, if you need to look back at it, you can, but I don't think we need to because we can tell the sounds in this word. The word is man. Man. Let's write it. Man. Man. Sam is a man. Rather than copy it, we just cover it over with a sticky note or something. And if students need to feel like they want to look at it again, I let them look at it. It's not like a punitive thing if they look at it, but I want to encourage them to do that sound symbol correspondence. So then we go through and we find the right words to go in the closed passage, and then we reread that story for some fluency. So that's the next part of the lesson. And then the last part of the lesson, we're going to be working on comprehension questions. And there's another phonemic awareness activity. This one does not have writing involved with it, and it can just be a movement activity with your students. If you don't have time for that, you can totally skip it. It is not as helpful as the other activities where we have combined the sounds with the letters. If you have an older student and the pictures are not great for that student because they're older and you feel like that would be too babyish, you can go ahead and use this fluency check as the reading instead of with the pictures, and then you can just do your dictation part where you're writing the words and writing the sentences on a separate sheet of paper. In this Val A, the very first lesson, I don't do word chaining because we are just working on building words. But as you go on in the lessons, you will find word chains that are given for you in the lesson plans. And I just want to take an opportunity to show you how to do word chaining with your students, because this is an important part of a lesson to be able to make those chains with the students. And I would suggest finding a time in your lesson to do a word chain or two. It's in the lesson plans, but it's not necessarily in the papers that you see right in front of you. So go ahead and do a word chain if you can. So you've got this word chaining paper. You can do it with tiles, or you can do it with writing. As I said, I always love to do writing as often as possible, but sometimes it takes some time that you just don't have, and it's faster to do it with letter tiles, so you can do it either way. So if I'm going to do a word chain or a word ladder, sometimes they're called, I'm going to have the student say, okay, we're going to do the word mat. What's the word? Mat. I'm going to dot it, or I can, if I don't want to do it that way, I can do it with markers as well, but let's dot mat. Mat. We're going to write the letters and say the sounds. Mat. What word? Mat. Now we're going to change the word mat. We're going to change it to the word sat. Okay, so we're going to do sat. 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 What word? Sat. Next word, sap. There's sap coming out of the tree. Sap. 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 What word? Sap. Okay, let's use these words in a sentence. Can you give me a sentence with the word mat? My cat sat on the mat. So you're going to use those in a sentence, and then after sap, there's sit, and then after sit, there's sip. So this starts in the CVC lessons, the second unit when we introduce I. So these are really helpful, so make sure that you avail yourself of the of the lesson plan and the word chains in those lesson plans, and they are throughout. The first level and the second level have word chains in them. So go ahead and do those word chains and use those with your students. So I hope this has been helpful, and if you have any questions, please do contact me.